Some people already think that Jim Hammond Human Torch very clearly is not going to be a good card in Marvel Snap. My own chat seems to feel the same way, but is it copium to think that maybe he actually could be? Let's talk about it, because I do think there are some homes, all of them, for Jim Hammond Human Torch. The bigger question is it worth the slot in the deck? Or are you just trying too hard to make this Human Torch be something? So let's dive into the card, talk about it first. It's a 1/2 with the at the start of each turn ability. So not a end of turn ability, but just at the start of each turn, +1 power for each bonus energy you have. Now, I do think there are some homes and pieces for this, because there are a lot of different ways to get +1 energy on the board. And if you lean all in on that synergy, I don't know if the deck necessarily is going to be completely successful. But when you remember that a 1/4 is a good card, or a 1/5 is a good card by the end of the game, you know, it's not the worst thing in the world. You know, you got to look at it similar to a Sunspot, similar to a Nebula. This is a card that you want to have down on the board as early as possible in best case scenario. Worst case scenario, it's a 1/2. So there has to be this balance of, does it fit into the archetype, or are you trying to fit it into an archetype, if that makes any sense? So here are the decks that I have going in for Jim Hammond Human Torch, and let me know in the comments down below, is this pushing too hard to get the card into the archetype, or does it make organic sense for this card because we're building around it, sort of? I don't know. You let me know. So first up is Gwykin Fireball. Now, Gwykin, pretty much self-explanatory in the mindset of you're playing to your energy. You're playing to Wiccan more than anything else, but you have other ways of having extra energy come to your gameplay. You have Merlin, you have Penny Parker, who is a copium piece, and I full well know that. Let me get that really clear. Penny Parker just as easily could have been Jennifer Kale, but I thought it was more fun to play Penny Parker, and I want to do something fun, so I'm trying Penny Parker. And it's a lot of P's to say. So it will have that Quicksilver curve, and the idea here on this is Jim Hammond's not a turn 1 play always, but more often than not it is. So if you don't have it, you have Quicksilver. If you do end up with it in your hand, go ahead and play that. It's a better play than Quicksilver in a deck that's trying to get +2, because if you hit Jim Hammond on 1 into the whole line of build Wiccan on 4, I mean, without even trying, Jim Hammond's going to end up being a 1/6, and that's really great power, and I don't think that should be slept on. So leaning into the whole Silver Surfer First Steps Gwenpool / Wiccan package, I was looking at that more in the sense of I have a 1-drop in my hand that I'm not playing because I'm playing Quicksilver. So it gives me another target for that Gwenpool to potentially hit, and to drop down that extra power for cheaper, rather than see it stack onto a bigger card that I might not be able to play in the final turns. Mercury Cannonball, still an incredibly strong duo. Galactus First Steps, always is good with Quicksilver, because you guarantee that if you draw both on the opening hand, you already are starting to scale the first steps. So I think there's a couple of other plays that we can make with this, but I opted to take out Gladiator for this typical build and lean into Luna Snow, which is the moment where then you have to decide, are you trying too hard to make the deck work? Typically, this deck has been very successful with Gladiator, but a 3/6 Luna Snow that gives extra energy, which keeps ramping into your your Jim Hammond Human Torch, is that pushing it too far or not? You let me know down in the comments below. After that, I have the Electric Pixie. I think Pixie is actually a really solid home, though, for Jim Hammond Human Torch, because you're not using all your energy, and the way that you gain that extra energy in this type of build, which features Electro or Luna Snow, I see that being as a way of scaling. But if you don't pull that line, Jim Hammond Human Torch then ends up at least having 1 cost on it, which benefits Pixie, because drawing Jim Hammond late sucks. Plain and simple. It absolutely sucks. So at least there's another purpose in a Pixie deck. Take that one cost and do the Pixie Shuffle and let it happen. So yes, it is a deck that is not running Mobius, but in many versions of Pixie, you don't have to. Do you want to maybe take out Armor for it, or Luna Snow for it, or Electro for it? That's up to you. But this is that same question I represent. Is this fitting the card into the deck or fitting the deck onto the card? Not sure, but I'm willing to find out and try it. Next up, what I think is going to be probably the top performer going into it. It's the deck that took me to Infinite last season, and I took out Cap and put in Jim Hammond because it's a Fall-in-One deck. Now, a lot of people are talking about Fall-in-One specifically with Jim Hammond Human Torch, and I fully understand why. Since we got confirmation that the energy that gets put on via the Fall-in-One will benefit Jim Hammond, everybody's looking at different variations of the Fall-in-One decks. They're looking at, okay, we play the Shuri or the Symbiote Spider-Man into the Fall-in-One and call it a day. I don't think you need to work that hard even, because I think Jim Hammond Human Torch organically with that Fall-in-One synergy is already going to have some really solid buff, some really solid bonus. When I ran this deck to have it beef up at the very end on turn 6 with Spectrum, or to drop down, move over that Mercury, which moved the Moonstone around, there were several different cheeky things that this deck was allowed to do. But it doesn't require you to lean so heavily into the Fall-in-One line that if you don't get it, the deck doesn't work. That's why I loved this build so much. So we're going to do it Hammond style and throw a Jim Hammond Human Torch and make the same assessment. Are we trying too hard to make this card work? Or are we laying a good deck on top of this card to see, does it make it better? Then, if you've been a follower of the channel for a long time, you know how I feel. And for the sake of science, I'm going to give in. I'm going to do the thing that my chat never expects me to do, which is actually agree and know full well that probably its best home is Arishem. And Arishem just leans perfectly because it's a 1/6. It's not fair to acknowledge that the existence of this synergy is good and then not test it. It's something that we have to look at, and I'm going to have to try. Now, you can see it in my chat above. They know I don't like Arishem. I don't like to play Arishem. I think Arishem is not the best thing for this game. But you think about it logically, after turn 3, I mean, it's a guaranteed 1/6. Guaranteed. No matter what you do, it's a guarantee because you're ahead of the curve. So I think it's worth testing. I think that playing heavy into the tech, you've got the Mobius, you've got the Lady Deathstrike, you've got the Shang-Chi, no matter what iteration of it you end up with next week, I do think that that ends up being worthwhile into all of the strong 5s and 6s, including Essen, to play all of those extra Arishem cards. He's going to be, in my opinion, this might end up being its most successful deck, but I don't know how much of it after the test I'm going to attribute to it being because of Jim Hammond Human Torch. And that's one of the things I'm going to be tracking about this card specifically. I think that Jim Hammond Human Torch does have homes, but is it the first card, the 6th card, the 12th card, or the 13th card that goes into each of those decks? That's what I don't know. Until we fast forward, because right now it is 12:51 my time until Lord knows what time later. So this is that moment we take our time and fast forward. Wah! And just like that, it is now, what is it, 9 hours later from when we were recording? I don't even remember anymore. But either way, we've been playing Jim now for the last 5.5 hours, roughly. And I'm ready to talk the good, the bad, the ugly of Jim. So let's just take a look at the decks in regards to how Jim worked within each of them. Okay. So first off, with this one here, let me just move myself over here. There we are. So with the Gwicken Fireball deck, I was surprised with the strength of Penny Parker. It felt like it was a really good shell of a deck. Playing the Surge, Mercury, Merlin, Penny to help the consistency of Wiccan was great. And when Jim Hammond got the +2s from Wiccans, it was great. There were a couple of games that we actually ended up with 1-6 and even 1-10 with Silver Surfer First Steps Wiccan happening too. So there were a couple of games in which that synergy worked. But the power that I got from Jim in that deck didn't feel meaningful enough, where instead I could have a different card that could counter my opponent more so than getting a 1-6 or a 1-10 on the board on turn 1 because of turn 1. So I was kind of like, meh, in regards to his placement there. It worked, but it wasn't my favorite card into that deck. The Electric Pixie, this surprisingly did pretty well. I was a little hesitant, obviously, as we talked about, with not having Mobius in the deck, but it did surprisingly well. I did have a couple of moments where I really did feel like I wanted to swap Taskmaster for Blink into this deck, but I didn't feel restricted from Electro. I didn't feel like I was missing out in this build because of what these cards typically want to do already. And having the backup plan of Jim have just be that one cost that Pixie can convert into one of the upper 6s, it did feel good. It definitely felt good. There's something here. I don't think this is this list, but it's really, really close. This is probably the most well-rounded of the initial 4 lists we tried. The Arishem list, I stopped playing after a couple of games because I just couldn't get enough Jim Hammond draws. When you do draw Jim on turn 1, yeah, he's a 1-6. It's great. But it's Arishem. So there's consistency, there's inconsistency, there's metas, and there's right metas, and there's wrong metas. I just never felt like it was an impactful change to the deck when there are other ways you could also do that too. And then in regards to the Fallen one, throwing him into the one-going deck that got us to Infinite last time. Like I originally said, I took out Captain America to put in Jim. And I truly believe that was a mistake. Retrospectively, it should not have been Cap. It probably should have been Juggernaut. Maybe even Gilgamesh. Because Cap gives another buff possibility to Captain Carter to go into Fallen 1. Out of all of the games I played, I only got the master play of Jim Hammond on 1 into Captain Carter, Moonstone, Fallen 1 as the 3-4-5. I only got that to happen once. And I won that game. But the lane that Jim Hammond was in got Shadow Kinged, and that lane lost. So looking at it all together and the results of the deck, Arishem, it's a fine home, no problem. I did substitute in Kang for Nick Fury because the new version of Kang came out today at the patch about 2 hours before reset. So we took out Nick Fury just to put in the new Kang the Conqueror at 3-4, who is loads of fun. Loads of fun. I do enjoy this card. Just saying. But after 14 games, I was just getting tired of not getting Jim Hammond. But the one game that I did, he was okay in the deck, obviously. The Gwicken Fireball, it worked, but it wasn't my favorite build of doing these Gwicken decks. The Electric Pixie, this was the best performing deck of the day. And it felt like it has a home in Pixie decks. It really does. But it needs to be a very odd build because you're building into this Electro, a Luna Snow style build. And Electro, I think, is a synergy we should be experimenting more with for Jim Hammond. I'm just not sure what that looks like quite yet. Like the Blink thing, I think is probably the right way, but I'll talk to some people to get their opinions on it. And then this was definitely a downgrade from the original version of this deck, which took me to Infinite last season. So out of all of the variations we tried today, some of the things that did stand out were that Jim Hammond wants to be a Fallen 1 card desperately. But a 3-card combo is not the way to do it. It has to be Shuri into Fallen 1 or Symbiote Spider-Man into Fallen 1. Because there's too much conditional variance to making that stack happen. And I was sad about that because this deck was a very good deck, and then we added Jim Hammond and it downgraded the deck. I was really hoping it was going to be an upgrade. The Pixie Shell, I definitely want to mess around with more. Gwick Fireball, I think there's something there. Maybe. This is a maybe. And then Airsham, I mean, you're probably just going to plop it into Airsham anyway. So when all is said and done, is Jim Hammond Human Torch good or is he garbage? And I regret to inform you that I believe he is garbage. I think he's a card that doesn't have a proper home. I think he's a card that wants to be good, but at scaling a single point of power at a time in a harder condition to make happen than a Nebula or a Sunspot, I say that a 1/2 that gets +1s is not something to build into. There's a couple of homes for him that could work, but right now I'm probably going to give him, to use our Snapcast podcast rating, I'm going to give him a silver. He's just not there yet. I want him to have a good home. It wasn't any of those. And you're going to see videos. You're going to see Jim Hammond's pop off. And look, I had a game where he popped off as well, and he was great. And it helped me win that one game where he did the thing. But if he doesn't do the thing, and you're working so hard to get the thing to happen, the flame just fizzles. So, unfortunately, Jim Hammond is probably going to be a garbage card, at least until further adjustment. So, have fun with New Kang, though, because that's a really fun card. Maybe I'll end the video with a Taxi sneezing fit, because that was probably more entertaining than most of the games with Jim Hammond.
What was that?
Did you guys hear that? He's sneezing. Oh, Taxi, you okay? Bless you. You okay? Oh. Either way, thank you all so much. For those who do not know, my name is Guest, also known as ItsGuestGaming. See you next time.